all is lost, quit. I'm Wayne Lively. In this 5th episode of the Eightfold Path to Poker Enlightenment, we'll be discussing a subject most important to your poker happiness when it's time to stop. I'm joined by the author of Elements of Poker, poker coach, and king of all quitting, Tommy Angelo.
Hey, Wayne.
How do you look at quitting differently than everyone else does?
I think it's that I look at all the poker topics different than most people, and that I don't remove them from our lives. That we are humans, and I do believe that we want to be happier than we are. We want to be happier more often, and we want to be more deeply happy. And when one person helps someone else, like when you, let's say when you go to a message board and a guy has a strategy question or some other question, you think you can write something that's going to help him. You would do it, right? You just jump in and type what you think might help the guy?
Yes.
So let me ask you, what do you think is your core reason for doing that?
Because I have an ego as big as all outdoors.
Well, there's one. Okay, so you're not doing it for his benefit. You're doing it for yours?
What? You think that altruism is my middle name? I don't think so.
Okay. Well, at least you know that. But
yeah, it's not even a religion.
Okay. Well, there are some people who actually, do you believe that there are some people who would help others in that case for the sake of the other person?
They're good for my bankroll.
Who is? Those people that'll help you? Okay.
Yes.
Well, I am one of those people who, when I reply to a question, the reason I'm doing it is because I think that my answer might make their life better. Now, I'm not thinking that as I type it when I say I think you should fold. But really, if you think about teaching, which is a human trait, there's a lot of evolutionary explanations of why we teach, because that's how our cultures become successful and how families pass on their skills and all that. Teaching is a basic human, almost instinct. But when it comes to teaching poker, you're teaching something to someone who could then use that directly against you. It seems like it's not quite logical. Have you ever thought of that before?
Yeah, that's
a lot of people ask that. Why do poker
right.
writers write their books? Why are they doing this? Well, I asked that question to myself many times before I even wrote mine, and I did realize that if I were writing it strictly for money, I probably wouldn't have done it. If I were writing it strictly for ego, I probably wouldn't have done it. But I really did feel like I had some things in there that would help some people out. And that's because I don't detach the poker topics from regular life. Now, of all of the topics where that applies the most, it's quitting. Quitting is the one topic, unlike information or strategy or game selection or anything, it's the one poker topic that touches our regular lives most directly and most often. Because right when we leave the poker game, we're re-entering our regular life. It is the demarcation between poker and non-poker. And also because a lot of the reasons that we do quit are influences coming directly from our real life, and when we don't quit well, it has a big impact on our regular life. So because I've already was taking this sort of holistic view of all poker topics and thinking of them in terms of how can we have a happier life by modifying our poker, quitting became just a really natural topic for me because it was so directly related to happiness, not just making more money, but the chain that we normally think would be we make more money, that makes us happier. But with quitting, it isn't necessarily related. The act of quitting can make us happier even when it costs us money. And so this is where the happiness quotient actually weighs in heavier than the profit quotient more often.
And if I quit well, maybe I won't get whacked when I get home for taking it home with me.
And you'll be happier.
So would somebody else who's probably really doesn't want to whack me for being such an asshole when I come home after
You're
a
talking
bad
about getting
session.
whacked at home?
Yes, with a frying pan for being such an asshole for bringing it home.
Oh, for bringing the bad poker mojo home with you.
Right.
Yeah. There are so many benefits to
that's painful.
To quitting well. It is.
Getting hit
painful.
with a frying pan. It hurts. There are times when you can't quit. You got to play. You use the example of the professional. The professional can't just play whenever he feels good, whenever he feels like playing. He's got to push beyond that, right?
Yeah, like let's say you live in Vegas and the games aren't good all the time, and you're in a super hot game. It's like maximum EV, and those types of extra juicy games don't come up very often. But you don't feel good. Is that what you're talking about? You just don't feel. You
No,
can't just quit because you don't feel good. You got to power up and tough it out and play.
more than that. You got to the casino, you got up, you got dressed, you got in your car, you drove down. You found a place to park. You walked 4 miles from the parking garage to the casino, and right, valet. But still, you got there. You put in the effort. You sit down at the table, and suddenly you realize that you're not really feeling, tip top. You're not, feeling a game-ish.
Right.
Suck it up. There was a time when I wrote. I wrote a lot, and one of the great excuses that writers have is writer's block.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I heard a great story one time. This mason comes home and his wife says, "Why are you not working?" And he says, "Because I've got bricklayer's block."
Good one.
She hit him upside the head with a frying pan and said, "Go to work." Now, we don't ever talk about bricklayer's block. We don't talk about garbage man block. We don't talk about President of the United States block. But we talk about writer's block. Now, it does exist. But most of the time, as a professional, if you're going to do something, you do it. And if you're going to do something well, even if you're not a professional, even if you're an amateur, you have to have a professional mindset. And part of that is get through it.
Well, the big difference, though, between bricklayer's block and, let's say, poker player's block, where you just don't feel like playing, okay, is that if you're not in the mood to lay bricks, you can still physically put your body next to the bricks, pick them up, lay them on the wall, and then go collect your paycheck. The difference with poker players is if you aren't in the mindset to where you can play winning poker, you can't just go through the motions and collect your paycheck. You go backwards. That is the key difference between menial labor and poker. And so we do need to talk about sucking it up and toughing it out and getting back up to the A game in the middle of a session when you've deteriorated. So I'm not saying that every single time you feel damaged that you should just automatically quit. This whole quitting topic is deeply complex because each person is different and each person is changing all the time. So what we're doing here is we're just tossing out a wide net of ideas, but each individual needs to know when to apply which things to which situation. Wayne, do you take breaks when you play?
Sure.
Like table poker, you take breaks, and online,
And online.
take breaks?
Yeah.
Why?
I got to pee.
That's a good
Get
reason.
something to, if it's home and I'm online, I get something to drink, get something to eat. Maybe, the Patriots just scored and I want to watch the replay. There's lots of reasons why I take breaks.
Do you ever just take a break, when you're flustered, took a bad beat, just to walk it off, shake it off kind of thing?
Sure. That's pretty important.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever take a break just because you feel like you've been sitting still for too long and you don't have to pee, you didn't take a beat, you didn't do anything, but you just I think I should just take a break now? Or is that a little more rare?
No, but I'm thinking about it now.
It does seem like a good idea. Oh, taking a break right now? Well, I want to talk about taking breaks. It's a really huge topic in the obvious way, which is it is an opportunity for us to recharge our batteries. Let's say you were playing your A game and you are down to your A minus game or your B game. It's possible to rebuild up to your A game while you're playing, but A lot of people believe that it's more likely to happen if you take a break and move around, especially if you do something physical. So I do want to talk about the importance of breaks in that sense and what to do on breaks. But more important than all that, I want to lay an idea on you about breaks related to quitting, which is, if you think about it, if you have trouble quitting, the trouble spot is removing yourself from the game, whether it's table poker or internet poker. The way I like to put it is the walking away is easy. The hard part is standing up, which is really true. It's hard to just sometimes get yourself up out of the chair. So if you really want to take on quitting as a skill set, as a new challenge, as a body of work that you're going to undertake, the way to do that is to start thinking of taking breaks as quitting practice. Because every time you take a break, you are physically removing yourself from the game. So this would give you a whole new reason to take a break that has nothing to do with peeing or football or shaking off bad beats. It's only about practicing the act of walking away from the table right in the middle of the game, whether you feel like it or not. What do you think of that idea?
I love it. Okay, see ya.
Okay, see ya. Okay, we can get back over here and sit down. I'm not done with you on this break thing.
Okay.
Okay, so first let's talk about breaks themselves, what to do. This ties in very directly with the overarching theme of this whole thing, which is about mindfulness, about concentration, about control over your mind, and discipline. And what I'd like you to do from here on in is to start thinking of your breaks in a completely different way, like you never have before, which is you're not taking the break to do anything. You're taking the break to remove yourself from the game. Even more than just physically removing yourself from the table or from your computer, I'm talking about mentally removing yourself from the game. And this takes effort. This takes real work. One way to do it would be if you were to walk away from the table and take a frying pan and smash yourself in the head with it. At that moment, you would not be thinking about the poker game. And that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about doing something that takes your mind away from the game, but that doesn't make you have to go to the emergency room.
Yeah, that would do it all right. Yeah.
So here's what you do.
You might have noticed that I'm familiar with the frying pan upside the head.
I know. That's one of your recurring images. I hate to think how that got there.
Dong.
So this is where you use the techniques of the ancient Eastern masters to control your mind and discipline your mind through the tool of breathing, with the tool of breathing and concentration, to remove yourself from the game. And what that means is, instead of going to pee and just peeing while you're thinking about that asshole that just beat you on a hand, or while you're thinking about, oh, this is great, I'm up 5 buy-ins, what you do is you just concentrate on the act of urinating, on your body, on the physical presence of yourself, and you concentrate your mind on the present tense, on what's going on. Now you can do this without using the breathing, but do the breathing, it's guaranteed success. And what that means is you just stand there, and for 3 or 5 breaths, or however many you can or you want to, you concentrate on your breathing, and that will, even ever so temporarily, which is all that's required, remove yourself from the game. And that is taking a real break. And if you can practice this over and over and take your breaks, and playing online, I think it's a good idea to never play more than an hour and a half, even an hour at a time. And you get up and you take one of these diligent, effort-filled breaks. Doing exercise on a break is great. If you're the type that does push-ups and sit-ups or anything like that, wonderful. That is a great thing to do on a break, even if you're not doing any kind of mental concentration or breathing, because it just revitalizes your body, gets your cells all oxygenated. But if you really want to capitalize on doing push-ups and sit-ups, is you do focus on your breathing while you're doing it, because that's the mental training part. That's the part that removes your mind completely from the game. And I can't really say anything here to convince anyone to do this, other than if you do it, you'll be convinced.
Why is it that when I first sit down and I'm fresh and I'm feeling good and I'm playing my A game, and then an hour, hour and a half, or 2 hours later, I've just deteriorated so badly?
Mm-hmm.
Is it an accumulation
It
of
is.
stuff?
That's exactly what it is. It is precisely an accumulation of mental stuff. And it's almost like an accumulation of weight, of baggage, of balls and chains of mental stuff that you are dragging around now that was not in your mind when you started. It only accumulates through the process of playing poker hands. That's why when you take a break, the act of clearing your mind and emptying of your mind, even just for a split second, because what you're trying to do is break this incessant chain of discursive thought that is just rolling along, and you break that chain, and even just temporarily, and that's enough to give you a chance to kind of restart and recreate the conditions of a game that you started the session with.
Before you get to the bad beat that broke the camel's back.
That's right. That's the reason to take breaks when you actually feel good. We do have an inclination, a natural tendency to take breaks when we feel really bad, to try to restart ourselves. But if you want to play your A game all the time, or almost all the time, that means taking the break, removing yourself mentally, charging yourself back up before it's a desperate time, before you even have to. So you're nowhere close to the straw that broke the camel's back, ideally.
One toke over the line, sweet Jesus.
Every time you take a break, you are quitting. It's this little short-term form of quitting. So by taking breaks, you are practicing the act of quitting.
Cool.
Yeah, it is. Let's say you decided you wanted to become a really good quitter. Well, you might think to yourself, okay, I'm going to practice quitting. But you only normally quit once a session, actually quit the session. But if you start thinking of your breaks as quitting practice, then you get to practice quitting 4, 5, 6 times a session. And what I mean by practice quitting is quitting when you don't want to, quitting when it's not natural, taking a break when you don't want to, taking a break when it's not natural. Because the problem with problem quitting is it's hard to do. We don't want to quit. We're stuck, we're addicted, we're whatever. It's really hard to just get up and quit. So you have to practice the act of quitting when it's difficult. And this means looking at your quitting practice as a higher importance than making money. It's a complete flip-flop of your objective. So you're sitting there playing, and you're not thinking to yourself, I'm here to make money. I'm here to beat these guys. I'm here to improve my A-game betting skill. You use the object of the game concept, and you say, the object of the game for me, this set of playing, is to practice quitting. That's it.
Is this how you became the king of all quitting?
It is. In fact, let me tell you how sick I was on this stuff. I've quit smoking something like 30 times, okay? And the cycle was always the same. I'd run really, really bad at poker, be completely disgusted with myself, and walking out of the casino, I'd say, I'm going to start over. I'm going to get my shit together. I'd throw away my cigarettes, and I'd go home, and I'd crawl in a hole for 2 or 3 days, and I'd come out, and then I knew I had to, completely break the nicotine addiction and some of the smoking habits before I went to play poker. So then I would go like 2 or 3 days of not playing poker and not smoking, and then I would go back to play poker, and I felt great about everything. And I would go play, and I would start smoking either immediately or on the way home. Sometimes I would make it through that first session, but then in the car on the way home, I would stop and get some cigarettes. And I went through this pattern once every 6 months or so for like 10 years, until I finally realized that the problem with the quitting smoking was getting home. It was getting out of the casino and getting home. So here's what I did. Now this is going to tie into the quitting poker too. I went to the casino, and my only objective was to park, go in, buy chips, sit at the table, play one round, quit, cash out, get in the car, and drive home and drive by that goddamn gas station and not buy any cigarettes and get home. And I did this more than once because it never stuck the first few times. So this is how I would be so obsessed with the idea of raising the priority beyond poker and beyond profit to something else. In this case, the something else was quitting cigarettes. But what I'm suggesting here is you take that same sort of insane priority shift toward the act of quitting if you have a problem with quitting. And we're going to get to that about how quitting at the end of the session is how you can lop off C game and all that. So I'm assuming that I'm talking to somebody right now who knows that they have a problem with playing too long and that it costs them a ton of money. And what you got to realize, until you take a drastic action like this, it's not going to change. It's just like with quitting anything else, it's a real addictive type of problem. It takes a huge upheaval and a priority shift. And so what I'm doing is I'm proposing an activity you can actually do, which is take a lot of breaks, think of your breaks as quitting practice, and then when you really do get to the end of the sessions, think of this as like, okay, I feel good right now. I don't really want to quit. I don't need to quit. Quit anyway, just to build up the quitting muscle.
This is how you become an expert quitter. The really important thing about quitting is lopping off the C game, right?
Yes.
And over time, it has a huge impact on your earn. For instance, if normally when you're playing your A game, your earn rate is 2 big bets an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end of your session, you're down to half a big bet an hour because you're tired, you're not playing well, you're taking the accumulation of crap that's just fallen down on you. Over a period of time, you just get exhausted playing.
Yeah.
So if you quit before that point, let's say you quit when your earn rate is down to 1 big bet an hour from 2 to 1. So you're saving half a big bet. Mm-hmm. If you do that 4 times a week, that's 2 big bets. That's 8 big bets a month.
Yeah.
Okay? That's 84 big bets a year. Wow.
That's like 840 million big bets per eon.
Okay, now we're talking, now we're getting into government budgets and bailouts. But what I'm thinking is that something as simple as leaving when you're supposed to leave, practicing quitting, maintaining your happiness, doing all those things, lopping off the C game, has such enormous long-term effects, not only on your happiness, on your well-being, on your health, but also on your bankroll.
And your relations with other people.
Keeps
so
you
you're less likely
to get hit in the head with a frying pan.
Yeah, you save on frying pan damages.
Yeah, that wear and tear is tough. Over a period of time, it adds up. And we tend not to think in long term. We tend to think, well, yesterday was yesterday, and that's about as far, as we can remember back, except for the bad beats, which we never seem to forget. But we don't think of next week or next month or next year, but how much that accumulates. So that practicing quitting leads to lopping off the C game, which leads to increased happiness.
The example you gave of your hourly earn going down as the sessions go on, and that goes for everyone. I mean, let's say you got a guy who's a recreational player, and when he's playing his A game, he breaks even. And when he's at a C game, he's minus 2 big bets an hour. We don't even have to start with the assumption that we're all winning players. Everyone's rate of earn or loss, or whatever you want to call it, deteriorates toward the end of their sessions if they play long sessions. It might not even be every session. So, this whole idea of lopping off the C game in general as a concept, is so important. That's why I put it first in my book, Elements of Poker. The first 4 elements are defining A game, B game, and C game. And then the fourth one is lopping off the C game. And there's a lot of stuff there. And then the fifth one is quitting, which is what we're talking about here. So I see quitting as a tool to use toward this higher objective of lopping off the C game. And it's the most important one because C game tends to show up at the end of our sessions. So it's just as natural as can be that if you want to lop off C game, you need to trim back the end of your worst sessions. And the example you gave, you were talking about going from winning 2 bets an hour to winning 1 big bet an hour. Well, just for the the sake of things, let's just assume that all C games are losing money. Okay, so everyone wants to lop off those parts of their poker playing when they're losing money.
But wait a minute.
Okay.
Let's take this a little bit further.
All right.
Your maximum earn is your A game.
Mm-hmm.
Anything less than that is your C game. So it is possible to still be profitable but playing a C game.
Well, we're not defining anything less than A game as C game. You can have A minus game, B plus game, B minus. We're talking C game is defined as your worst, not just not your best, but your absolute worst. That's what we're talking about lopping off here is your absolute worst.
But there's going to be people out there, me, who
Okay.
say, I don't have a C game. I don't play that badly. So my C game is still profitable.
Well,
but it's not as profitable.
Oh, I see. You're saying you don't have a C game because you always have an advantage.
No, it's because I don't let myself get that bad.
Well, no, it doesn't. It doesn't have to be bad. C game. Recall back the
Not to
earlier
losing.
episode.
I don't. If I lose, I'm getting beat.
That's why I made an exception here. It's possible to have a C game that wins money.
Right. Then that's why I was giving the example of, in my A game, I'm at 2 big bets an hour, and when I'm playing my C game, I'm down to a half a big bet an hour.
Mm-hmm.
It's still profitable.
Yeah.
And I don't want anybody out there to think that, well, I don't have a C game because it's not a losing game.
Right.
So it is losing from where you are at your maximum.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get that straight.
Yeah.
Because I don't want anybody out there to think that we're talking about C game is you can play your A game and still be a losing player.
Right, and you can play your C game and still be a winning player.
Exactly.
Every kind of player out there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to make that clear.
Okay. Well, I was trying to say that so that I didn't have to make other concessions so that these ideas could apply to everyone. Let's start with a different assumption, which is let's assume that everyone has some portion of their poker game they would like to eliminate. Forget about whether it makes money or not. We're going to call that C game. It could be C mindset. Okay, the guy could be just absolutely miserable. Well, maybe he's good enough a player that even as his worst state, and because his game selection is so good, that he's still profitable. That doesn't mean he's happy with that performance. So we're going to start with this assumption that players have some level of performance that they hit sometimes that they're not happy with. Okay, and that their overall happiness would be better if they lop that off. And if that level of low performance happens to be a losing performance, that they would also make money by lopping it off. However you want to do it or look at it, we're starting with the assumption that there is a level of performance that people wish they didn't have. And we're going to call that C game. So this act of focusing attention on lopping off the C game is A, going to make more money, and B, make us happier. And it just so happens that the most likely time that C game appears is toward the end of sessions, because that's when we're more likely to have been in some state of deterioration. And so that's why quitting as a lopping off the C game topic is so huge. Wayne,
What?
let me ask you something.
Okay.
Would you say it's fair to assume that if you played 10 10-hour sessions over the course of a year, and you were to look at just those sessions and look at your earn rate during the first hour, the second hour, the third hour, the fourth hour, all the way down, do you think that your earn rate would be, significantly lower in hours 9 and 10?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So if you had the ability at hour 8 to have the awareness to say, I'm in my C game now, I'm going to quit, and you did quit, that would bring your hourly earn up dramatically, right?
Dramatically.
Okay. So now, but here's the catch. It so
There's
happens
always
that
a catch.
There's always a catch.
Always a catch.
At hour 8, now I'm not talking about every session you go into the C game. That's why I said, say 10 times a year, right, that you hit your low point. At that 8th hour of those 10 worst sessions of your year, those are the times when it's most difficult to quit because you're at your weakest. This is the catch-22. You're in your C game, but when you're in your C game is when it's hardest to have the discipline to just say, oh, I'm in my C game, now I should quit. This is sort of like smoking cigarettes. People used to come up to me and they basically say, hey, I think you should quit smoking. The implication was you'd be healthier if you quit smoking. I'm like, well, no fucking shit. Doesn't help me quit.
I think you should piss off.
And just because we know what's good for us doesn't mean we're going to do it. And it's especially worst at the times when we have what I refer to as the needle in our arm, which is when you're in this long session. It could be 20 hours. I said 8 to be generous. Could be you're way over the top. You're playing way too long on basically a binge. This is going to be the time when it's toughest to just pull up and pull out. That's why it's so critical to practice these skills of quitting when you feel good. It's all about preparing for the worst and being on the lookout for it and see the warning signs hours in advance. And you take breaks and you keep taking breaks and you keep rebuilding back up to your A game during the sessions. And this whole thing, you can put numbers on this. It's probabilities. We're saying that there's some probability right now that you will attain your C game a certain number of times in a certain period of time. Months, years, whatever. If you do these practices of taking breaks more often and focusing awareness on C game and practice quitting and taking breaks with the purpose being to lop off C game, you're just changing the probability that you will achieve C game.
Now we move on to stack size and quitting.
Wait.
What?
One more thing.
What?
About lopping off the C game.
Go ahead. What is it?
Here's what it is. It's that when you lop it off, that means you take your previous lowest point and you get to a state of discipline where you're never going to get that low again. You still have a C game. You never get rid of the C game. It's just now you have a new C game that's not as bad as the old C game was. And you keep applying everything we just said here toward the C game at all times. So you have this gradual lopping off. Your old C game goes away. What used to be your B minus game now becomes your C game. And then you lop that off. And then that B minus game becomes C game. And so it just keeps going up and up and up. And this ties into the image we looked at in the first episode about improving from the top up and the bottom up. And that's what lopping off the C game is, improving from the bottom up.
Now, you're going to convince me that in internet poker, size matters.
Oh, it does. Now, you're talking about stack size, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, stack size, yes. I want to talk about no limit hold'em or pot limit omal or any big bet poker online and the effect that stack size has on quitting in two cases. One is about position. Let's say you're playing a 100 maximum buy-in game and everyone at the table has 100 except you, who have 200, and the player to your immediate right, who has 200. This is a great situation because if you play a really big pot, the only time your additional 100 is going to go into a pot is in a pot against the player on your right, who you have position on. So you have just a fundamental advantage there with your extra 100, we'll call it. Now flip it around. Let's say the only person at the table that has 200 besides you is on your immediate left. I would quit this game. And I believe that just a randomly selected game starting over with 100 would be better than being in a situation where the only way I can ever get my additional 100 into a pot is in a pot against a guy who's got position on me, guaranteed. Another situation where quitting based on sack size comes up is when it has to do with the skill levels. So let's say, same situation, it's a $100 maximum buy-in game, you've got 200, and the only other player at the table, or even a couple guys that have 200, are players that you think are better than you. Well, same concept applies. The only time your additional 100 is going to get into the pot is in pots that are only against those guys, side pots or just heads-up pots. And I believe that starting over in another game with 100, if it's not automatically a better idea, then what I'm really suggesting here is that it be weighed in to your decision matrix. It might not be enough to say, oh, I'm absolutely going to quit every time this happens, but it should weigh heavily into your decision.
I don't believe in stop losses. I don't believe that you should set an artificial limit on how much you're going to lose before you even sit down at the table. I think it sets you up for losing. I think it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that you're going to lose that amount because that's the amount that you said you're going to lose before you leave. I don't believe in it. Talk me out of it.
Okay, I will try to talk you out of it. When you say this, this is like general advice you're giving to people that you don't think they should use a stop loss. Are you operating on the assumption that they would make more money? I assume you're thinking that they would make more money if they didn't use the stop loss, right?
No, I'm saying that they're going to lose more money because there are times.
Well, I mean, over the course of years, you're saying if they didn't use stop losses, their end result would be better.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I strongly disagree, and here's where and why. I'm going to tell about my experience with this, but just because I have much experience with using stop losses and not using them is irrelevant. What we're talking about here is just people in general. You could give your own case and say because you don't use stop losses, you believe your score is higher. I could say because I've used stop losses, it's kept me from being basically broke my whole life. But we'll get to that in a second. If we're talking with the assumption that one piece of advice to the other is going to make people more money in the long run, all I have to do to show that your argument is false is make up a character who is like many characters, which is somebody who once they get stuck a certain amount, they go completely on crazy tilt. So let's say you got a guy whose total bankroll is 50. He's a no limit player. His total bankroll is 50 buy-ins at the stakes he plays. Okay, and he knows that if he gets stuck 10 buy-ins, that he can't control himself. That he'll just play on unbelievable tilt, and he'll play for 30 hours.
What I call bankroll suicide.
Yeah. So are you saying that you believe that guy, over the course of years, if he were to blow his entire bankroll every time he got stuck deep, that he would be better off doing that than having a stop loss of 10 buy-ins?
No, I think that I might have to make an exception in his case.
Okay, in his case. So now we'll just hold on to that, and now we'll go with the what we all know, which is that there are infinite degrees of people and behaviors, and people behave different ways. So at the other end of the spectrum, we have the perfect player, the professional, the player who, no matter how much he's ahead or behind, always plays his A game. Okay. Now for this player, I agree that stop losses would be just ridiculous. He's stuck 10 buy-ins. If he's in a game that is going to deliver positive expectation to him, the fact that he's stuck has no effect on that. So he should keep playing. He would be losing money by having a stop loss. I agree with you. So we agree that on one end we have a fictional extreme character whose stop losses are bad for. At the other end we have another character whose stop losses are absolutely essential to his poker survival. And then we have infinite numbers of people in between. And that's why I say stop losses are completely personal. There's absolutely no right or wrong prescription that applies to all players all the time. So it's a matter of knowing yourself. It's a matter of knowing when you should have a stop loss, if you need one, what number it should be at. And then it's a matter of actually doing it. One way to do that is to not have a whole lot of money available to you. There's some downsides to that, because when you're on your last buy-in, you might not play great because you're on your last buy-in before you have to quit because you didn't leave yourself any. But on the other hand, sometimes it can be good, because there's been times when I was on my last buy-in that I had in my pocket when I played great during that last buy-in because I had nothing else to lose. It's like I wasn't timid, I wasn't afraid. So there's two sides to this coin, and it's a there's 100 sides to this coin.
Okay, I'm almost convinced. I don't understand the mindset of someone who loses 3 buy-ins and goes on tilt.
But do you believe that there are people who do that, who lose 3 buy-ins and go on tilt because they're stuck?
But I don't think that it should be about the 3 buy-ins. I think it should be about the tilt. Separate it. Do whatever it takes.
Fix the tilt. So if they fix their tilt, then they wouldn't need the stop loss.
Then they wouldn't need the stop loss.
I agree with you completely.
What I'm looking at is that if you set a certain amount of money to lose, and if you lose it, you go home. And it's a good game. Mm-hmm. It's a game that you rate to win money in. Mm-hmm. You'll come back.
Well,
You're going to profit eventually.
If they're not on tilt.
If they're not on tilt.
Right.
But fix the tilt. Don't fix that. You can't fix tilt with stop loss. I believe if you are trying to fix your tilt by stop loss, mm-hmm. eventually you're not going to play at all because you're going to walk in there on tilt.
Well, I agree with you that you can't fix tilt with stop loss. The two topics are completely unrelated. Stop loss is about earn. It's about net earn. It's about bankroll. It's about the size of your bankroll. Stop loss decisions are related to how big your bankroll is going to be compared to not using the stop loss. Okay, tilt is a separate issue. I agree with you that if somebody didn't tilt, they wouldn't need stop loss. But the fact is, people do tilt. And the fact is, a lot of times people do tilt because they're stuck. And when they do tilt because they're stuck, they tilt really bad. And so I agree that it would be great if a person who tilts could one day wake up and just stop tilting. But until they do, the stop loss is not merely a good idea, it's absolutely essential. And as someone very much experienced with tilting and with playing professionally without much of a bankroll, I had stop loss gizmos set up that would blow your mind. I mean, I had like money at my brother's house, and I had like 5,000 up there and 5,000 in a mutual fund that I was going to take me 7 days to get to. And I would, anytime I got pumped up, I would put 5,000 over here and 5,000 over there. That's all stop loss. Every single one of those decisions was only about stop loss, because I would do stop loss, and this is important. We tend to think of stop loss in terms of time duration of one session. Well, I needed much more than that. I needed stop losses that were weeks long, because I knew that if I had one bad session, well, okay. 2 bad sessions, not so good. 3 bad sessions where that third session was caused by the other 2 sessions where I just felt like crap and I was really in bad shape, well, I needed to run out of money there. I needed to have my situation set up so that it was going to take me 2 days to even reload, so that I had a forced break. That's a form of stop loss on another level altogether. And there's no doubt in my mind that the reason I set those stop losses up was because I knew I needed them. And there's also no doubt in my mind that if I didn't have them, there's no way I would have survived as a professional poker player. Now, that's just me. But that's why I'm really tuned into this topic, because, yeah, you can say, well, somebody needs a stop loss, they're just weak. And I would say, you're right. That doesn't mean they don't need the stop loss. That means they do need the stop loss.
They need it worse than anybody does.
Yeah. So stop losses, this is the way I like to put it, is stop losses are a great idea for the people who need them. And for the people that don't need them, don't do them. But to come out and say that stop losses are categorically a bad idea is a bad idea.
Well, I guess I was incorrect.
my buddy Alex has a way of putting things in a way that make us realize just how silly we are sometimes. And he had this one great thing he said about quitting. He said, have you ever been in a game where you're up 1,000 and later on you're up 500 and you're thinking about quitting, and then you end up blowing another 500 or another 1,000 and you end up leaving stuck, and you think, damn, I should have quit when I was up 500. And I'll be like, well, yeah, I've thought that way many times. And then he says, have you ever been in a game where you're up 1,000 and later on, and you keep playing and you end up winning 2,000 for the day? And then do you ever think to yourself, God, I should have quit when I was up 1,500? I'm like, well, no. Of course, he makes a very good point there that we're very, very results oriented when it comes to second guessing our quitting decisions, and we're also just a bunch of silly saps.
Alex was stoned when he said that, wasn't he?
Well, if he was awake, I guess so.
What about when you have a curfew, when you have to be someplace at a certain time?
Yeah, curfew, this is what I mean by looking at quitting as a skill set. You break down all the different kinds of quitting. There's quitting with a curfew and quitting without a curfew are two great examples of, you just got to put yourself in these situations and ask yourself, what do you do well? What do you do poorly? Quitting with a curfew is a kind of skill that you can definitely practice. And the way you practice that is you don't wait until you actually have a curfew. You can do it beforehand. You can go in and say, okay, I'm going to play until 1:30 and I'm going to quit no matter what, whether I'm ahead or behind. And then part of practicing quitting with a curfew is, especially the last round, if you have a tendency to play extra loose when you're stuck during the last round, then you address that beforehand. You think, okay, when the last round comes, I'm going to fold, and I'm going to quit. And this is almost like weightlifting or any sort of exercise where it takes dedication, it takes work. You're not playing that last round to make money. You're playing that last round to practice the skill of quitting. So then when you do have a curfew next weekend and your wife says, okay, you have to be home by such and such a time, because you've practiced it, it won't be so stressful. When you're stuck and the last round comes around, you'll be like, oh, I know what to do now. I'm just going to play great. I'm going to accept my loss, and I'm going to go home on time.
Quitting is much more difficult if you know what your hourly rate is, and you know that it's really not about the cards, it's not about the session, it's about the hours.
Yeah, this is where some of the teaching that has come down from on high over the years, from say, Sklansky and Malmuth and Cairo and whoever else, it's great teaching if we are robots. In other words, if we're playing in a really good game, that we shouldn't quit because it's a high profit. But we are humans. If that were true, then that would mean you should basically, and if you were good at game selection and you always played in good games, that would mean you would play every single hour of your waking life and never sleep. So there has to be some point where the physicality and the physiology of being a human being enters in to where it could be correct to quit, even if the game is good. And that's where knowing your hourly income can get in the way, because you think, okay, I'm an expert player. I'm making $40 an hour in this game. I happen to be stuck 1,000, but so what? I'm going to keep playing because I'm making my $40 an hour. Well, if the act of being stuck 1,000 means that you're no longer making $40 an hour because you're off your A game, then you're in a state of delusion. And good quitting requires seeing deeply into ourselves and being able to analyze our actual performance at each moment.
Quitting relieves us of our suffering. So really, that's what our goal should be, isn't it? That's what our target should be, is to quit and relieve our suffering at poker so we can play again. We want to. We'll feel like it. We'll be happy to play again because we know we can quit.
When we quit well, when we know we should. Is that what you mean?
That's right.
Yeah, when we quit for any of the reasons that we know are the right reasons at the right time.
Even if we're on tilt.
Especially when we're on tilt.
And we quit because we're on tilt.
Yeah.
And we quit because we know we're on tilt. We quit because we're suffering. We're hurting. We need to stop. And we quit. The next time we come back, we know that if it gets too bad, we can quit again.
You're protected. When you know you are a good quitter, because you've demonstrated it to yourself many times, it gives you a level of safety and security that in itself relieves suffering, because one aspect of suffering is fear, one of the main ones. And so when you're not afraid of having those terrible sessions anymore, because you know you're going to be able to quit before they get too bad, that relieves the fear of that pain.
Okay, here's the deal. Throughout this episode, I've also been throwing back at you the fact that I'm concerned we might quit too soon. That it may become a habit. That it's easy to quit. You just stop and you leave. And you stop sooner and sooner and sooner. People are always saying that life is like poker and poker is like life. Well, this is a true Zen moment for us in this series, because life is suffering. The only way to get totally away from suffering is to die, is to quit life. So while quitting will relieve suffering temporarily,
Relieve poker suffering. I mean,
poker suffering, you're going to be back into it as soon as you walk back in there. So my thought is find ways to relieve your suffering while you're there.
Oh, definitely. Well, that's what mindfulness is all about. The act of sitting up straight and breathing and concentrating on the moment is the act of relieving suffering, whether you're playing poker or not. That's the beauty of all this. And because poker generates so much suffering, you can practice it right there. I want to challenge you on one thing you said, which is the idea that, yes, life is suffering. But I disagree when you say that the only way to end the suffering is to die. That's Buddha's message, is that you don't have to die to relieve the suffering. You can relieve the suffering while you're alive, and that is nirvana. That is salvation from suffering while you're alive through these practices.
But I've had this joke forever and ever and ever
Let's hear it.
that says problems are God's way of letting you know you're still alive. The only people that don't have problems are in a graveyard.
I disagree.
Yeah, that could be a bigger problem. We just don't know.
There are very, very few people who have the ability to not suffer at all. But they do exist. And for people like you and I, raised in our culture, you could say, well, pretty unlikely I'm going to get to the point where I have absolutely no suffering every moment of my life.
Well, you never will.
I might.
You know why?
Why?
You got me as a friend.
Well,
that's always going to cause you suffering.
Well, that's, it's really funny that every single
and Alex.
idea that comes out like that is like I hear it in my old way, in my old mind, but then I know it's just not true, because I don't need to suffer. It doesn't matter. If my wife died in a car wreck tomorrow, if I walked out of here and got in an accident and lost my arm, that doesn't have to cause me suffering. In fact, now I want to get to an important point. It's all a matter of degrees. let's say a terrible event happens and it causes 100 units of suffering. Well, if by way of mindfulness practice and meditation, you are able to reduce that to 98, okay, that's a win. You reduced it. It's all a matter of degrees. And so if my wife were to die tragically in an automobile accident today, I would suffer. But the amount I would suffer is, I would estimate it on a numerical scale, approximately 1/10 what I would have suffered before I started doing these practices. It's all a matter of degrees. And another really important point is, you can only undo suffering in the moment. I cannot plan right now to undo the suffering I will feel if I get news that my wife died. But when I get the news, at that split second, I can undo the suffering only when it unfolds, when it happens. And that really is the whole thing. And that's how, one of the questions they asked Buddha, they say, so you've attained full enlightenment. Why do you still meditate every day? He would live for 45 years after that, his big night under the tree. And he said, do you expect to eat once and have it last your whole life? Do you expect to breathe once and have it last your whole life? The meditative practice is a nourishment. It's an ongoing, strengthening nourishment that gives you the ability to dissolve suffering as it arises.
Now, you've said that the cause of suffering is attachment. The cause of bad quitting is attachment. Are you really attached to that statement?
Oh, I am so attached to that. There are some things it is good to be attached to. Being attached to the idea that attachment is a bad idea, I think, is a good idea. No, but really, when
I quit. That's it. My head just exploded, and it's all. I've got brain matter all over the screen. What the hell was that all about?
So picture yourself playing at the Bellagio. You're stuck, and you don't want to quit. What is it you're attached to?
My money. It's sitting on the table in somebody else's stack.
Exactly. And if you were not attached to the money, then you would be able to quit. You would have control over yourself.
If I wasn't attached to the money, I wouldn't be in there in the first place. Well, I'm attached to their money.
Well, that's true. It is. This whole attachment thing is very, very tricky.
And as we said earlier on, quitting should be your target.
That's right. This is a great example of the difference between targets and goals. I mean, to this day, I've made quitting such a big part of my focus, but there are still times when I go play, when I don't follow my own prescriptions of when I should quit. I give you an example is the difference between quitting at limit and no limit. I'm extremely good at quitting at limit hold'em, and I think it's easier to quit at limit hold'em in general because the maximum amount of swing that can possibly happen. And so if I'm stuck, 50 big bets, I know that even if I run super hot for the next round, the most I'm going to win is 20 big bets. There's no way I can possibly get out of the hole.
Yeah, you ain't coming back from that.
I can't get out of the hole quickly, right? I mean, there's been times
Right.
I've been stuck 50 big bets and played 12 hours. But with no limit, you never know when the next hand, might get you well all of a sudden. And as much work as I've put into this, there are still times where I stay and play no limit when I'm not playing my A game, just because I know that if I double up, I'm going to get well. And, I know how ridiculous all that is, but that just goes to show you that quitting is a target. It's not something you just accomplish and you're done with it. It's an ongoing thing that you aim at.
Quitting is a skill.
It is.
It's a poker skill.
Mm-hmm.
It's one that you can work on. It's one that very few people do work on. And when we say at the top of the shows that this isn't about how to play poker, it's about becoming a poker player, quitting is becoming a poker player.
It truly is.